think we can get started. There may be some folks streaming in, but good evening, Wabash.
Good evening.
Welcome to this year's Lau Lecture. To begin, I'd like to thank, and I do this on behalf of the PPE Steering Committee, Dr. Jim Lau, class of 73, for making it possible to bring Dr. Patricia Glazebrook to our campus. And thanks to the generous support of the Dr. Jim Lau 73 PPE Fund, Wabash students in the campus community will have the opportunity to interact with Dr. Glazebrook in and outside of the classroom. We had a scintillating conversation today in my environmental philosophy class. And our community has a chance to find in this evening's talk, I wager, something that will linger as worthy of thought and as calling us to action. A word for thanks is also owed the Department of Philosophy, the Department of Education, the Environmental Concerns Committee, and the Environmental Studies Steering Committee for supporting in various ways other learning opportunities for students and faculty during Dr. Glazebrook's visit. Finally, thank all of you for coming out tonight and for taking advantage of this evening and throughout the next few days of this great opportunity to learn and to think together. It's my great pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker. I can think of no more fitting speaker than Dr. Patricia Glazebrook to deliver this year's Lau Lecture, as her scholarship covers a wide array of topics, draws on multiple disciplines and ways of knowing in philosophy and the social sciences, and seeks to illuminate contemporary social problems not by neglecting the thinkers of the past, but by critiquing them, supplementing them, and retrieving their best insights. The program in philosophy, politics, and economics at Wabash seeks to cultivate precisely this kind of historically informed, cross-disciplinary inquiry exemplified by Dr. Glazebrook's book. Even if students in our Intro to PPE courses sometimes ask what Hobbes' Leviathan has to do with contemporary controversies of immigration, or how Rousseau's discourse on the origin of inequality speaks to their contemporary policy interests, eventually it seems to click. If I and my fellow colleagues in the PPE program have contributed anything to this kind of success in the classroom, this has much to do with having models like Dr. Glazebrook. Engaging with Dr. Glazebrook's work, being in conversation with her over the last few years has been invaluable to me in understanding how my own background in ancient Greek philosophy and contemporary continental philosophy can yield important insights when put in dialogue with other discourses such as environmental philosophy and ecofeminism. So let me also express a personal note of thanks to Dr. Glazebrook. Dr. Glazebrook is one of those philosophers who seems to be everything, everywhere, all at once. And that pop cultural reference also seems to be everywhere all at once in our conversations these last few days. Since she's a professor of philosophy in the school, she's a professor of philosophy in the School of Politics, Philosophy, and Public Affairs at Washington State University. She's a member of the graduate faculty at the University of North Texas, a research associate at Houston State University in Nigeria, and a board member for the Gender CC Women for Climate Justice in Berlin, Germany. She serves on the board of governors for the Center of Research of Environment and Sustainable Development in Lagos, Nigeria. She's also on the editorial board of two book series, New Heidegger Research and Meeting Rivers. The same balance of thinking and acting evident in all of this service to the profession is evident in Dr. Glazebrook's impressive publication record as well. She's author of Heidegger's Philosophy of Science, editor of Heidegger on Science, and has published more articles than I can count on environmental ethics and policy, philosophy of science and technology, ecofeminism, Heidegger, Aristotle, and many other topics, many of which speak to issues being explored by PPE majors in this semester's senior seminar. So that's a hint of a search term that you could put into your next library search as you go look for articles. But Dr. Glazebrook is not simply an academic philosopher who writes about policy or a policy analyst who also reads Aristotle and Heidegger. She also walks the walk by, for example, serving for over 10 years as an observer for the Gender CC delegation at the annual Conference of the Parties, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, interpractical organizing, engagement, and interventions. Dr. Glazebrook exemplifies the realization of thinking in action to the greater good. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Patricia Glazebrook, who is speaking to us this evening about women, food security, and justice in sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, thank you so much. The person you didn't thank was you, so I'd like to thank you for making this possible. And also, now that I've heard all of you said about that person, I want to get to know her. Mostly, I think I'm probably just too busy, and so I don't think of it as doing a lot of stuff. I just think of it as loud, apparently. Is that okay, or is that too loud? Do you want to adjust it? Is there a way to adjust it? It seems like it's echoing and it's too much. Bottom of the... Yeah, it's definitely too much. Even I can't listen to myself that well. Although it will keep me awake, so... Oh, that's better. What do you think? Is that good?
That's good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's get started. Gender and food security in West Africa. As you can see, I put the title above West Africa. So, what am I doing to, this is it? Okay. Has it got batteries? Oh, no, it's falling off. Yeah, this one you can stick on. I'll just go to the old-fashioned ways where I know how to do it, which for me isn't old-fashioned, because for me old-fashioned is, you don't want to know. Or I actually would not want you to know. So food security in Africa, I've got a lot of information here. It's being recorded, so you can look at it later. I tend to talk too fast, so I often say things twice. So sorry about that. If it's just too fast, put out your hand. And if something happens when I'm talking and you're like, I really need to say something about that, just feel free to jump in, because we're not a really big crowd, and I'm here to hear from you as much as you are here to hear from me, and I'm really enjoying meeting with your students here. I'm fascinated and amazed by the kinds of questions that you ask and the kinds of answers that you give in response to the answers that I give. So thanks for making me feel like it's actually worthwhile. After 28 years of teaching, it's really good to be reminded that it's important to keep doing it. Oh, that's not what I'm doing. Okay, so the United Nations World Food Program, the WFP is the short for that, and that provides 2020. The one I have is the version from 2020 here, but they provide a hunger map by country. There's 6 countries that they identify as having at least 35% of the population and more than 35% of the population in chronic hunger. Of those 6 countries, 4 of them are in Africa: Chad, Liberia, Rwanda, and Madagascar. They also report 8 countries with 24% to 34.9%, because 35 is the one we already talked about. So in that chunk, a population, so 24 to 24% to 34.9% of populations in chronic hunger. That's 8 countries they identified. 5 of them are in Africa. So we've got 4 out of 6 and 5 out of 8 in countries. The ones in the 24% on Sierra Leone, the Republic of the Congo, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Lesotho. So what I'm basically telling you is that Africa carries 2/3, 9 out of 14 of the countries that have 1/4 plus more of their population in chronic hunger, and 2/3, i.e. 4/6 of the countries with 1/3 plus of its population in chronic hunger. It sounds a bit like Africa struggling for food at this point. So what the World Food Program says, our data may not be may not be accurate, and they say it may not be accurate because the data is not available for 12 sub-Saharan countries. So 12 sub-Saharan countries in Africa, hence sub-Saharan, are not able to provide the data because they are too much in conflict and have other kinds of problems. So 3 of those countries, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zimbabwe, quote, will stretch the UN Food Relief Agency to the limit, and that's being spoken by the UN. The actual leader of the UN. I had the name on there, I don't know what happened to the name. Find it later. So it seems then that chronic hunger falls, as does poverty, on Africa disproportionately compared to other areas of the planet. So let's look a little further at gender. Let's introduce gender into the question of food security in West Africa. And that really is the place where I want to talk about the motivation for this lecture. From 2019 to 22 in West Africa, the percentage of people experiencing moderate food insecurity jumped from 34.6% of the people to 39.5%. In 1 year, a 4.9 increase. If you think about that in terms of being only 20 possibilities for that to happen on a yearly basis, for it to be 100%, right? That's where they are with that. When it comes to beyond moderate food insecurity, the category of severe food insecurity was at 19.6% and jumped to 28.8%. That's a 9.2% increase in food insecurity in a severe way. And keep thinking that, remember that those people who are in severe food security moved there from moderate. At some point they had enough food, they became moderate food insecurity and moved into severe. And those ones that are in moderate, the way things are going because of climate impacts, are likely to continue to find themselves in food insecurity at a severe level. So we should be horrified by that. We should be trying to do things to change the situation such that that not be the case. Because that basically is telling us that more than 2/3, as of 2020, 54.2% jumped in 1 year to 38.6% for food insecurity in West Africa. If that happened to us here in this country, we would be terrified, and we should be terrified, because the truth is, Africa is the place that first experiences the challenges of the world when it comes to things like food, wealth, etc. The more that we are eaten out from the bottom up by climate change, the closer it becomes to us being the ones who next will not be able to feed our children, who will next not be able to go to universities and do the things we expected in our lives. And I'm sorry to say it, but don't listen to old geezers like me, because I'm going to be dead soon. Not that soon, but eventually soon in comparison with the students. This is your world that my generation and my parents' generation has totally... So will you be able to have children? Have you ever thought about that? What's life going to be like for them? I'm terrified of what it's going to be like for my son who's 20 at this point. What it's going to be like for him 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, because of climate change. So I'm going to talk about that quite a bit more as we go through. Here we are seeing the beginnings of the horror for West Africa, which is more people than tons of countries put together from Europe. More people than are in this country, and if you add on Canada and other places, right? So a massive number of people are right now, 2/3 of them, in hunger that is not going to get better unless we change things. And perhaps it's getting to be too late even to kind of make those change. So in case I haven't already made you really depressed and miserable, welcome to it. This is the future. So 14.1% of the population in that 1 year is 159 million people who lost food security. 159 million people in 1 year losing food security. Again, why are we not terrified by that? Why are you not thinking, I don't want to listen to this talk, I want to go and something to do about it now, because this is actually real and it's happening. And I'm just doing what philosophers do, blah, 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 but I'm doing something else because I'm upsetting you. So you will remember, and you will think what it might mean for your lives in 10 years, and 20 years, and 30 years, and your children's lives. And if we don't get on that right now, there's not going to be any hope of making a change. So the most vulnerable then, Who are the most vulnerable when you have these kinds of food crises? The poorest. The poorest are the people. The poor are the people who have inadequate resources to manage crop shortage or crop failure. I mean, here, if you're a farmer and you don't grow enough what you were intending, you go and get money from the bank, right? Or if you don't have enough money to eat, you go out and buy some food. You can't do that if you're a woman farmer in Ghana and you are living off $1 a month. How are you going to get food if you're not getting the food that you put in, where you put in the ground in the rainy season, and then it grew up, and then you cut it down and keep it, and you eat it, and you feed your family until the next rainy season? If you can't get through that rainy season, what are you going to do? What are you going to do so you can feed your children? And there's some answers we can have to that, but I'm not going to give those answers right now, because if I do, we'll be here all night. Who are the poorest farmers then? The poorest farmers in Africa, and I would say the poorest farmers globally, are women. They're the women farmers. So where I work in northeast Ghana, 87% of what is eaten is grown by women farmers. And they're not farmers who take it to the market, they're subsistence farmers. Subsistence meaning they farm in order to be able to eat with their family, for their children to eat, their partner, their neighbors, whoever it is that they're working with. It's usually not neighbors, but it'll be your aunts and uncles and your cousins, etc., the family connections. If they don't have food, they'll come to you. And eventually, who's going to have anything left to feed anyone? So mostly the poorest farmers who are suffering from climate impacts and food problems because of that in the south of the planet are primarily women. So we have to think about the gender factor here. So I basically am putting together this kind of long introduction in Africa on the issue of climate, poverty, gender, and hunger. And what I want to show is how climate issues, poverty issues, and gender issues come together with giant hunger. So, human impacts then. We all know that greenhouse gases emissions are put into the atmosphere. It's happening all the time. It's whenever a cow farts, it's that. Whenever somebody drives a car, it's that. Everything that we do that uses greenhouse gases is contributing to what's being put into the atmosphere. Africa is responsible only for 4% of GHG emissions. And why haven't I put a year on that? I haven't put a year on that because as long as how much it is a proportion of greenhouse gas emissions across the planet is consistently, for as long as it's been recorded, only 4% for Africa. But you got to keep in mind that I'm not going to the climate talks. I've been going there since 2010. I'm not going this year because I'm sick and tired of bloody going to it on an airplane, and then nothing's happened. Nothing has changed. Oh yeah, this has changed, and that was changed, and the other was changed. Everything has changed. Nothing has changed. You drop the stone in the lake. Everything moves. Nothing moves. Everything changes. Nothing changes. Nothing has changed with what the UNFCCC has done. And we should also be very concerned about that because they are the people throughout the entire planet whose countries are all agreeing that they're going to fight it. And they have not been able to fight it enough such that the number has not, of greenhouse gases that are newly being put into the air have happened. Every year it's been an increase. I've been tracking now for 13 years. Every year after it's been more, when their job that they promised to do was that they would make it less. And so the Africans are also going more, but they go more proportionately in a way that just stays at 4%. And I would love to say that that's just because they're really cool, smart, interested people, but the truth is I'm telling you because they don't have the finances to be able to do the damages that we can do in the global north. So people in the global north says, well, we should have, children, and they have a lot of children down there. So maybe if they had less children, we would have less problems of all these kinds of things. And I'm like, okay, let's look at the use of resources of global north and global south. Basically, the math turns out that if you in the global north are a man and wife and have 2 children, and you are therefore having an impact on what what's being done in actions that is causing climate change, and then you go down to the global south and you figure out how many children they would need to have to contribute the same amount of greenhouse gases as you're doing, guess. How many children do you think they have to have to meet the same amount? Any guesses? Yep.
At 7?
16?
7, 16?
Yeah, I was going to say 20.
You're also going to say 16? I hear 16, I hear 119. You would have to have that many children to put as much graft into the atmosphere as we are doing, as we sit here now, and our children are or will or did do, etc. Right? That's the difference. Yeah?
How much was it? 119?
Yeah. Sorry, I haven't actually got that written down. So maybe 99, but it's definitely around 100. I'll send you a very more precise thing, but that's the one that always sticks in my head. And it can, sort of change from time to time, right? But that's basically what I'm sticking with now, is that. I mean, when you think about it, it's horrific because it makes you understand not just that particular difference, but the difference of how much resources one child uses in our country, in our part, of the north of the north as we know it of the planet. So the 5th IPCC, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, anybody there ever look up stuff in there? If you want to know anything, excellent, thank you. If you want to know anything about climate change, you need to go to the IPCC because they're not somebody saying this, somebody saying that. They're everybody who's saying something in science about the issue, pretty much everybody putting in their information. So they are the collection of all the information together. You're going to get more information there. And this comes basically in 4 sections and then a bunch of other stuff. The first section, if you're a scientist, good luck with that, give it a go. If you're not a scientist, just go straight to the second one, because the second one is about culture, it's about people's lived experience. It's not about a very scientific thing about how this and that creates this and that in the top. It's what the impacts are on cultures, on countries, and they do a lot of research on the global south. The bad thing is they can't actually tell you much specific. They can tell you everything that happens in Ghana, but they can't tell you specifically what happens in Accra, the capital city, because they can only do so much, right? Because they're doing the whole planet. So they just do it by bigger areas, and then you have to go and do research to dig up people's research on smaller areas, because no country is the same all the way through it, right? So if you want to know specifics about what it's like in one part and another part, you have to start digging it up for it yourself in other places. But the IPCC is definitely the place to start. And what have they told us in 2018, which was the 5th time that they produced one of these assessment reports, and it was in 2018, and they pointed out that the temperatures in Africa are likely to rise faster than the global average. And why is this the case? So here's the planet, there's the top, there's the bottom, and the sun's over here. So the planet's basically tilted like that, and the place that's getting closest to it when we are spinning around it is in Africa in the south. So it's hotter there than it is anywhere else on the planet in the summer, and it's hotter there in the winter than anywhere else in the country is in its winter, right? So that means that they are most getting slammed. And the first time I heard about climate change in Ghana was from women who had barely got into 3rd year grade, but could totally, in 2002, before most of us had not even heard of it yet, were able to describe it in detail without scientific words, but the actual going on of what happens when the heat comes down and it doesn't go back out. And what they could explain climate change to me precisely without that kind of education. And they could do that because they knew that it was harming their agriculture because it was changing the rain patterns, which meant they couldn't grow the food to feed their children to the extent that they needed. Because only 4% of people in Africa have water systems that they can use to, spray and all that other stuff. They basically have to go pull water out of a river. They have to have dug a hole that they can pull water out of. So they have to go and get water, or they have to wait for the rain. So very few actually have the kind of equipment that we have here who are farmers. And those 4%, what are they doing with that farming? Selling it out mostly to Europe, because it's close to Africa, right? So it means that the people who are doing that aren't even providing it for people who are living in Africa, right? They're not taking that African water and give it to Africans. They're using it to grow that food, and that food's then going to the global north, because we need to eat a lot, even though we need to throw a lot of it out when we're eating a lot of the time. So, climate change then. Annual increase in is caused by the annual increase of GHG emissions 4% I just pointed out of SSA means sub-Saharan Africa. In other words, not on the north of it, but in everything below that is irrigated. So only 4% of that is irrigated, and farmers typically rely on rains. When the rainy season comes, it's pretty much historically for a long, long time been that it comes on 3:30 and stays till 5. I mean, you could predict it pretty much every day in the rainy season, and it would come every day, and that doesn't happen now. So impacts of climate change, well, obviously the most obvious thing is the temperature increase that is caused by the stuff that we put in the atmosphere that causes climate change. Right, so it's coming from largely us. People will say that's not the case, and everybody's free to have a view, but that doesn't mean everybody's correct, and everybody has to have their view, and I tend to take the view that was reported by all of the scientists around the world. But if I read something online, in a Zoom, or not in a Zoom, if I was looking online and I saw something telling me this whole totally different story, I'd be like, yeah, that was true. Those scientists don't know, but I support scientists, I believe scientists, so I'm sticking with it, and if you have a different view, you should stick with it, because one of the most important things about education is you get to learn to figure stuff out for yourself. You got to figure it out. And if you're figuring it out in a way that turns out with a conclusion that's not the conclusion I have, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm going to tell you keep thinking. And you should tell me, well, you keep thinking. And I'll be like, well, I'm thinking that. And then we can argue about it. But basically, the whole point is to keep thinking so that you cannot be stuck in a belief that is not your belief, but is what your community has taught you, what you have read in places. You need to read a lot of things and think about a lot of things and ask a lot of questions, which you guys seem to be really good at doing, so thank you for that. Thought it was dead, but turns out it's not. You guys are keeping it alive. So that's good. But the most important thing in life is think for yourself. Because if you're thinking for other people, you're not getting the best for yourself. You don't have to be selfish. You have to think for yourself. So temperature increase. What happens with temperature increase? The polar meeting. So the bottom of the planet for so long has just been covered in snow and ice, and now it's melting. What does that do? It raises the ocean. What does that do? Slow loss of islands, because as more water goes into the oceans, it goes somewhere and starts moving up. And it's not like, bang, one day you're covered in water. It's like, oh man, I'm having a hard time growing my food now because the ocean has come up, and now the ocean water is getting into where I grow my food, and it's salted. And if it's salted, it's not going to grow your food well. So you're losing your food because this water is coming out and salting the area where you're trying to go. It's a traditional ancient Greek thing. When you conquer, a village or an area, the first thing you do is just salt it, because then it makes it very hard for them to get food. So they have to go and find other places and work harder, and you just make it a big problem for them. So slow loss of islands, which means loss of communities. I had a 16-year-old girl say to me to the face, now it would have been some 20 years ago at least, saying, hey, my island's going under the water. The water's coming over it, I know. I sit on the beach, and I'm 16, and I can see that the beach is almost gone now. The tree that used to be a big walk to get to is gone now. It's under the water. It's there. And there are these lovely people on the planet nearby who have already said that they will take us when our island doesn't work for us anymore, when it's covered with water, and we can't stay here, and we just can't grow enough food now. That will be fine for us. They will take us. They will allow us to come and live with them in their houses. And I'm like, thank you, that's so nice, that's so nice. I will not be able to speak my language. I will not be able to eat my food. I will have to live in a different culture. I am already dead. She's 16 years old, and that's what she told me. It just gives me chills thinking about that, thinking of her understanding of the situation that she is in, that she or her parents never had any choice on. And so that loss of islands is destruction of cultures, which means also of music, food systems, and all kinds of other things. At the same time, we have this internal planet pressure, right? So that, have you ever, you've been in a room and you've picked up really, really heavy things, and you're like, I'm really strong, I'm picking up heavy things, and then you see a big thing of water and you're like, right? Water is really, really, really heavy. As it melts from the north and the south, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And what are the consequences of that? Oh, I don't know. Has there ever been an earthquake recently? Has there ever been unexpected water movement? Giant floods, in other words, is what that's called. I've got a few things to name specifically on that, but think about it. What do you know recently about earthquakes, earth, water movement, water, death by fire, fires? Have you heard anything about those three things recently? All in 1 month, perhaps? So well, did I say enough about climate? Probably, because it's just upsetting me. Oh yeah, I have to get it because agriculture is the main issue. You probably already read it because I've been talking so long on this one. So changing weather then also causes drought, flooding, heat. It would make sense the temperature increase is caused by heat. In fact, it is heat, including, getting bigger and bigger range. So fires, what do we get also with changing weather? We get loss of human, animal, natural entities. You have birds who now are showing up at the wrong time of the year because the tree that they eat from came earlier because the heat was earlier, and it came and went. And they fly up there as they go. You think of that, birds who can fly from the bottom of the planet to the top of the planet, and now they can die on the way by starving because climate change has impacted when that thing that they want to eat grows. So they're losing the timeline for that. I know, it's like, I don't know if we're smiling or crying at that point, it's the losses that are being caused by human activities that are not just infecting, making consequences for humans. We're making choices that are killing everything on the planet. We'll get to some more details of that later. The one I really want for what I'm working on, the one that I really talk about, is unpredictable rain. If you're growing food because you're an agriculturalist, you're a woman farmer, you're not growing to sell it and make tons of money, you're growing the food in order to feed your family. And you're relying on growing something that's full of all kinds of nutrition, and it rains the one day, and it rains the next day, and it rains the next day. Now, because of climate change, you're not getting any rain for a couple of days. Well, that means that not the same number of, the same proportion that I would be able to grow food is going to be there now, right? Because it wasn't growing for those 2 days. And then you don't get it for a week, and by then you've lost a giant amount of your crop, and you could lose your whole crop. So what are you going to do about that? You have to find a way to change your way to change that. So what climate change is doing is damaging food and therefore damaging nutrition, which means it's causing also hunger, and it's causing poor growth, because if you don't get enough, it's one thing to have enough food, but when you see the pictures of a baby who has arms and legs like twigs and a great big blown out stomach, that's one that's not getting protein. All they're getting is carbs, and the carbs don't build your muscles. You know that because you all seem to do giant amounts of exercises, which I find kind of scary, the level at which you do them, but well done. When I was younger, I could probably do that too. Right? So poor growth, you don't get tall enough, you don't get big enough, you don't get strong enough, but also it affects your brain. You need those nutritional values in order to develop your brain. So this is a complete collapse of your life experience that you're going to have now going up into an adult. You may not even last that long, because when that stomach gets that big, it means that the liver is having a problem. And the thing about livers, well, if other parts of your body get ill, then you can survive for quite a long time. But if you lose that, you got a week, tops, if you lose your liver, if your liver's not working. So it can be a sudden death when suddenly what's been caused by not having the right nutritional value has affected your body. Just in case you were not completely already unhappy and upset by the things that I'm saying. There we are. So Africa then, let's talk about poverty. It's the only continent that didn't achieve the 2015 Millennium Development Goal on poverty. Every other continent reached their demanded requirement, like what the plan was for how successful you would be on reducing poverty. Africa was unable to do that. At that time, 19 sub-Saharan African countries experienced food crisis in at least 8 of the 10 previous years. So by the time we were having that in 2015, they were already in hardcore impacts, damaging their capacity to grow food, creating food crisis. We also have to look at the issue of gender equity when it comes to poverty. So the world's, and this is 2021 data, so it's not that long ago. 22 of the richest men on the planet have more money, if you put their money together, than all the money, if you put it together, of the 680 million women living in Africa. So 680 million women in Africa do not together have the same amount or equal amount of, better way to say it, that 22 men on the planet have. So there's a justice difference there that is not just about if you happen to be something else is just the point here is that that's a gender distinction, a hardcore gender distinction. 2019, women were 35% more across the planet likely to live in poverty than men, and 11%, which is 1 in 9 of women, were living in poverty. 11%. So 11% of women, which is 1 of every 9 women on the planet was living in poverty in 2019. 5% were living in, 1 in 20 were living in extreme poverty in 2019. So that's actually that's a lot of women. So let's just jump and say more about gender then. So the United Nations 2019 report reported 90 countries. Women daily contribute 3 times more hours than men to unpaid care, domestic work. In other words, every day women work 3 hours more than the men do. And if you add that up, as an average, if you add that up, that's quite a lot of extra time of work that women are doing, because at the end of the working day, the husband and wife go back home, and the husband sits down, and the wife has to make the food. And she also sews the clothing, and does whatever, the other things need to be done with children. And she does those while she's pregnant, and she does them also while she's carrying a baby on her back the whole time. So it's not just that it's more work, it's work that requires more effort in other ways because of what also comes with that kind of work. So it limits the women's education, it limits their capacity to have paid work, and it also adds to their capacity to have leisure time. So it reinforces socioeconomic gender bias that requires more labor out of women than it requires of men, and gender bias disadvantages as well. And I'm going to talk about some more of those in another point. 1.4 billion women on the planet are subsistence farmers. 1.4 billion women on the planet grow the food that keeps children, husbands, other women, cousins, people alive. That's what they eat. Northeast Ghana in West Africa, the average national of food, sorry, something's missing there. Average nationally of food grown by women is 65%. So the average of Ghana nationally, so for the whole country, is 65%. But as I pointed out already, 87% of that is in the north part of the country. It's what is eaten in the upper east. And climate adaptation, the women are going to rice. Rice has almost no nutritional value. What they typically grow traditionally for centuries is millet, groundnut, which are full of protein and calcium. They can't take the risk that there's going to be not enough rain on so many days that they're not going to be able to grow enough food to feed their kids until the next rainy season when they can grow again. They can't take that risk because in that gap their children will starve or at least go through massive hunger, which will affect their brain development, their body development, right? So they're basically sacrificing the nutritional content in order to just have something to put in the kid's mouth. So that's why they're changing to rice, which has virtually no nutritional value. And they were given a thing for, you put it in and it spins it around and it takes off the outer skin. So you just get the white rice that we like to see. Well, if there was any nutritional value in that rice at all, it was on the outside. And now even that's gone. And it was given to them by an organization that is a global organization that should have known that that would not have helped them at all because it would cut off any of the nutrition that had been left in it. So that's a sad story, and we'll have to see how they're kind of doing it as experimental, but after you've done it for 5 years, it's not experimental anymore, you're kind of trapped in it. So intergovernmental, the IPCC, again, food insecurity is a key climate risk in the global south that's causing all kinds of troubles. Vulnerable, women are vulnerable, they are marginalized socially, economically, culturally, politically, and institutionally. So when food insecurity comes along as a big risk, women in Africa, particularly poor women, are most vulnerable to be harmed by that because they don't have the resources to buy something to compensate or to buy better equipment that would allow it to happen better, etc. So sub-Saharan Africa, women farmers are marginalized in all of these ways that the IPCC has identified as marginalized on the basis of climate impact. So then we get to hunger, and we're almost done in the introduction. By 1820, 795 million hungry people were on the planet. 780 of those 795 people are in the global south. Think about that. By 2018, 780 million people in the global south, 98% were hungry in comparison with the other 15% global north, which is us. And I just had a lovely dinner here, thank you so much. But sometimes when I'm eating, I'm just like kind of hiding it because I feel a bit shy that I'm eating all this food when there's people who are not. And then you took too much and you can't eat it all. That's nasty. Somebody else somewhere isn't eating it all. IPCC, return to it. Food insecurity is a... I already said that, sorry. Don't know why that stayed in there. Adaptation in northeast Ghana, in Africa, that's the rice. I don't know, I don't know what I was doing there. I got the same things in that I already said before, so I did tell you on occasion, I will say it twice because I got too quickly. Hunger at the intersection. So you see how hunger is an issue at the intersection of climate, poverty, and gender. It's how climate has an impact. It's how poverty doesn't allow you to improve things when they get bad for you. And then gender is it's your responsibility and you're not getting paid for it and you're not even getting recognized by the country that you're doing it in and feeding. You know, the government could not survive if people who work in the government didn't go home to their mother who grows food that they can therefore get enough to eat in a week because they can get some from their mother if they go back to the house, which is the place that they grew up, right? If they weren't doing that, the government would collapse because it isn't able to pay their employees enough money to be able to buy that and all the other things they need to have a functional house. Not a rich house, just a house that's functional. So the human-nature relationship then, there's two drivers of hunger. Nature-driven impacts, like a giant flood destroys your food source. Human-driven impacts, we just don't let people buy it because it costs too much and they don't have the money. So these, nature-driven impacts and human-driven impacts are entangled, but thank you, Aristotle, we can think about separation, right? We can think the separation between nature's, nature-driven impacts and human-driven impacts on our capacity to provide enough food for our people. So human activity can be caused by nature. For example, we have clothes, we have houses, this affects people, so human activity is caused by nature, it affects nature, and we respond to that, because I grew up mostly in Canada. You cannot go out in Canada in winter, which is like 8 months of the year, with a bikini on. At the same time, if you go out in the summer with your clothes that you wear in the winter, you're going to be like melted very quickly, right? So, we have clothes and houses. Excuse me for coughing right into that. And that's based on what we do because of how the situations that nature puts us in. And also human activity can affect nature, for example, accelerating climate change that causes human harm. So they're connected together and they come in kind of circles or spirals for these things to be affecting each other. So what do we learn from that? Nature doesn't need us. We're probably the only thing on the planet that if we disappeared, nothing would really notice, except things might be better. Did you notice when we first were all shut down? All of a sudden, those cities that are like, you can hardly walk through it because there's so much in the air from cars blowing stuff out the back of the car, right? Within a week, that was just gone. I was like, wow, it was that quick that we could have fixed that. People live their whole lives breathing in that stuff that's messing up their lungs. It's like, big problem, it's a big problem. Turned out we could have just got rid of it in a week, right? We are, perhaps I'm beginning to think, not the wise animal that Aristotle suggests we are, for those of you who like to read philosophy. Nature doesn't need us, but we sure need nature. So now I can finally tell you the purpose of the lecture, other than to just, go on and on for ages. To expose the cause of African women's growing loss of capacity to provide their children with nutrition. That's primarily what I want to talk about. But I also want to talk about how philosophy and other disciplines, for example, this building is the home of which discipline?
Social science.
Social science? What was the other one we were talking about? Lose?
Economics, technology.
Oh, I thought we were doing it in the economics place. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, very careful what I said.
History.
Oh, okay. Okay, so those two things can actually really, surprisingly, those two things can actually really strongly go together, and that's something else that I want to show. And how, am I running out of time already? Because it seems like I've taken all too much long for how far I am.
We're about 45 minutes into the time period. You're about 35 minutes into your talk.
Okay, so I need to get there. Okay, so treating two crashing issues. The first issue is the long-standing gender bias that restricts women's agriculture. And I'm just going to say that again because it's a focal point that I want to make. I want to describe and show long-standing gender bias that restricts women's agriculture. And I want to talk about the role of capital in failure to respond to climate change. So I'm going to say that one again as well because it's like a crucial point that I want to make. The role of capital in failure to respond to climate change. And I say crash because the outcome of those two things crashing together is starvation. So examples from Ghana, West Africa, peaceful Sudan, Savannah, from Cape Verde in the Atlantic to Ethiopia and the Red Sea. Here I just wanted to justify why I'm doing it in Ghana. And the answer is because Ghana is in this ecosystem that starts on the west coast and goes all the way almost entirely to the east. So if you find out information about stuff that's growing, stuff to do with nature in that area, it's going to be similar situations right across that area. So being in one place where there's not everybody or anyone even hardly at all, some, but not that many, at war. Ghana is one of those places where it's safe to go and do that kind of research, but it'll give you information that you can't go and get in other places because it's too risky to go there. And I never cared about going to risky places, and then I had a kid. And then I was like, I can't just leave the kid. Right? I stop going to those places. But it's always changing which ones are worse, right? Secondly, then, I wanted the research site. I have the research site there since 2007. I first really started it about 2002, but I didn't actually get a bunch of interviews and do stuff and then start turning it into papers that I could publish into 2007. I did interviews, focus groups, field walks, mapping, recording labor details, seasonal schedules, taking a thing, asking them what they do in this part of the year, what they do then during the day, and mapping it all out and scheduling it all out so you can see how you can see how their work actually works. And just writing it down on paper is exhausting. I can't imagine how those women do that all the time. And they're like, oh, you were strong here. And I'm like, I can't believe they're saying that because the way that they can work in a day, the work that they can do, all with a baby on their back is just, I'm embarrassed to be there because I can, the 5-year-old is carrying water on her head in a bowl, and I can hardly even lift it off her. It's that heavy, and she's 5 years old, and she's already trained and useful for doing that. And I'm like, I gotta get back to the land and then, working out a bit more or something. So, feminization of poverty, identified for the first time by the United Nations at the 4th Women's Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995. So it was that point where somebody started collecting a ton of data and saying, hey, women are more poor than men. We'll just call that the feminization of poverty. How poverty has become more of a women's problem than it has of men's problems, which doesn't mean that it's not a problem for lots of men, but it's just important to know that. And perhaps it's comforting to know however it is crappy for you, it's probably worse for some woman somewhere. Feminization of agriculture. Women are also increasingly working at a small scale in agriculture as subsistence farmers in the global south, and largely they're doing that because they need to have some kind of income diversification. In other words, the husband has to go out and get a job that's going to pay more money, and often they're already doing that, but if he's out there earning some money, that's really helpful, because then if what you're growing isn't enough to last to the next one, your family now has some money so you can go out and buy some food somewhere. So you can continue, not necessarily a lot, but it's something you can at least start with. So the real problems are the ones for the women who don't have a husband, who can go out and be a police officer, be different kinds of jobs. And there's hardly any jobs, so they're not going to let a woman have it because they're going to give a man to it, because he's going to have to look after the whole family. But of course, the woman has to look after the whole family too. But it's not a whole family because she doesn't have a husband. I think that's some of the logic of it. Right? So it's a real problem for women who are not having a partner, a husband with them, not having enough money to be able to go and buy food if they can't grow enough. Women's food tasks: growing, storing, processing and preparing food, handling livestock, gathering food, fodder and fuel wood, managing the domestic water supply, providing most of the labor for post-harvest activities. Basically reading that, I assume why I don't have sleep. I was exhausted in about the third or fourth one, and that's basically typically what women are doing over and over again, consistently. So what about women farmers in Ghana then? Let's look at there as an example, specifically as the kind of biases that they face as they are growing the food that feeds. In the area where I work, 87% of what is eaten is grown by women, right? Right? Okay, this is what they're not allowed to have, do, or take advantage of. Which is crazy, because you're the one eating the food, and you're the one making the decision that they shouldn't be able to have a bank account. They shouldn't be able to do this, that, and the other. Women feed up to 17 people for a year. I say up to 17 people a year because when I've done interviews with women who are growing food and seeing their family and the people that they are growing it for, the biggest number I've ever found is 17. Can you imagine growing enough food with virtually no resources for 17 people? That's a really big deal. And the only way you have is a hand hoe. It's like a stick and then it's got a flat thing and you just walk through the field like that, like that. All you can do is that to dig the ground, to plant, and to get rid of, stuff that's getting in the way. You don't want them growing when you're growing food, right? That's all they have to do it. They have seeds that they have saved from last time they planted. So when you plant, you keep some seeds because then you can start it, again with that for the next year. And also, there's one I really like. In case you want to know, let me, call me and I'll send you the menu. How to make homemade animal dung fertilizer. They can't afford to buy fertilizer, so they go out and they collect animal dung. So in the morning you open the door, your house is sort of a circle of small buildings you've built, and then there's the door, and you kind of open it, and all the cows that were staying in the middle of the night, and all the other animals that you have there, they have quite a few number of different kinds of animals, they all go out and stroll around and eat and poo, and eat and poo. That's basically what they do all day. And then they know, oh, it's getting dark, it's getting evening, and the animals come back, and then the next morning you go and you collect that, and you take it home, and you turn it into fertilizer. So if you need fertilizer, just let me know. Impediments to women farmers have been recognized for decades, yet they still don't go away. For example, lack of land tenure in Ghana. 87% of the food that you eat is being grown on land where women are growing it, and they are not legally entitled to own that land. What that means? The husband dies, the brothers of the husband come and say, we will take it now. He is gone, real sorry, real sad. We will now take it. And they'll do that just before harvest. So not only is she losing the access to the land, she's losing the stuff she's been working on for the entire hot season, so that she's growing the food, right? It's the rainy season, so in the rainy season she's growing the food, and somebody's now come and taken it. In the two cases that I have seen in the area where I have worked, where they actually went to the chief of the community, the community in both cases decided that those women, they were separate, they went separately. It wasn't like they were together or something, but in those two instances, it was decided in each case that the woman had the right to continue to grow the food on that land, and the men did not have the right to take it back as the brothers, so the family had owned the land, and it was lost to her. They wanted to have it lost to her when the husband had died, so she got to stay the land. The part that upsets me is that she typically keeps the third daughter, and the third daughter is there to help her with agriculture and with other things, look after it when she's older, that kind of stuff. So the agreement was not how to protect her, how to give her rights, how to give her a way to create food, etc. That wasn't in the agreement, so I don't know what's going to happen to her. But the lack of land tenure in Ghana is a big problem for women who are farmers, and a big problem for women across Africa. In some places they do have some access, or larger numbers of women can have access to land, but otherwise they can't. Women can't own land, which is a completely difficult thing for them when they're needing that land to grow food. Bank accounts, 54% of women have bank accounts, 62% of men have a bank account. A lot of those, that's from the World Bank. But when you're in Africa, it's very rare for women to be able to have a bank account. And particularly where I was, I show up there with a bunch of money as a white woman who's spoiled as you cannot possibly imagine being a white woman in Africa. And it still took 2 months for me to be able to get a bank account. we will go for lunch on Wednesday. And I'm like, no, we won't. We will go for dinner on Thursday. I'm like, well, I think I'm talking with your wife that day. I can't go, right? I mean, basically the guy was like, do me this, do me that. And I'm like, do me your job. It's just to get me. And I mean, in the end, the guy ultimately had to do it, right? But it was 2 months to get it for, you know, not someone who's in the community that he's got a traditional habit of just saying no out loud. I was able to get it in the end, but it was still very difficult and uncomfortable, as you can imagine. 2012, here's data from 2012, small farms, which by definition is less than 5 acres. Men held 30, so 2012 was a while back, but still hasn't changed that much. Men held 73% of small farms, and women owned 27%, so that's not too bad, right? That's pretty much a quarter, just over a quarter, right? Large farms, more than 5 acres, men held 89%, women 11%. So they have some access to those things, but it's much smaller than what the men have access to, and the women aren't actually owning it, they're just using it they're able to use it to grow it. And then they have also, women have limited access to machinery. Nobody wants to give it to them because they can't afford to keep it, can't afford to pay it, can't afford to replace it if it gets, fix it if it gets damaged. They don't have access to credit. They don't have supporting labor, fertilizers, agriculture extension services. In other words, programs that support agriculture by providing money so they can do things. So basically, they're just pretty much left on their own. So we finally we came already to the actual first of the 2 sections that I'm going to talk about, which are, for some reason, my introduction is giant, but I wanted to have a kind of a background, and now these parts are filling out on that background. So biosim farming continues, agroforestry. So, doing agriculture that's in forest areas, because you can do different things in forests. It's not necessarily about digging and growing. It's about taking things out of trees and finding things that are already there. You can figure out what it is. And also agroforestry can, do things like finding things that you can then turn into what gets picked up by, places that make perfume and all different kinds of, or skin, a lot of the skin rub stuff that you can get, squirt, and feeling all soft now. A lot of that actually comes out of Africa, and in many places it's women. So the women work really hard on it, and then they sell the stuff to a guy who runs a corporation for, say $5 for this particular amount, and he sells that amount on for $20, and it gets sent on for a lot more, and eventually I buy it for a stupid amount of money and put it on my arms, right? So it's difficult for women, given all the time and stuff they already have to do, to find the time to actually run that kind of collectedness of coming together such that they can be running how much it costs to send it to the next thing. You have to send it to the first person who will collect it together and send it to the next thing. So they're kind of losing a lot of benefits after all the work they've done creating it, right? They're the creators of the thing initially, and they're getting a tiny, tiny portion of the money that's actually being paid through the system after that. And so the only way that you're going to change that kind of stuff, though, so forestry was actually completely denied for women in Ghana for quite a long time, even though tests had shown that it's beneficial both for women and the people that the women are doing agroforestry for was beneficial, but they still didn't have access. So the only way you change that is if you have policy intervention to change what has been for a long time a common practice. So for example, you could provide women working in agroforestry for providing supports for them to do it, access to the resources to do it more, and building women's strong groups to bring about the changes. So because the primary thing is it has to be legal for them to work in agroforestry for them to be able to do that, right? So that's got to be the primary goal, and then these supports. But women are shown to do well in that as it is already, so that's a good sign. And women are denied or limited access to land tenure, to bank accounts, as I pointed out, machinery, credit, supporting labor, fertilizers, agricultural extension services, most of the things that really need to do agriculture. So global bias against women farming for profit in particular is a problem, and I just added this in because this is a note and something that I wrote with some colleagues. I said, we gotta write this thing, and we wrote this in 2020. It's had more quotations than anything else I've ever written that's done it in 3 years. right? That's the biggest amount of quotes I've ever had in the first 3 years since something was published. So that's kind of interesting. I didn't think it would be a big hit like that. But one of the things that it showed is that there's a global bias against women who are farming for profit, which is typically in the global north, as well as some who do want to sell in the global south. In the global north, women have struggles with that. Fathers would rather sell the farm on average than have the daughter take over the farm if the son doesn't want to take over the farm. So women are just simply not respected as being capable of agriculture, when in fact they're providing most of the food to large areas of the planet, right? So gender bias against women's farming for the let's supposed to say market, not marker, cannot be challenged without policy. Again, we need to have policy reforms and other interventions for implementation. So we basically need governments in Africa to get their act together and start trying to make policy changes that are going to allow women to do what they do well now, even better, and importantly, more easily for them to do it, because they do it well now, but it's so much extra effort because they don't have rights, they don't have supports, etc. So it would be really nice if that could get changed. And who would it not benefit? Children would eat more, probably more nutritional value, also, other members of families, etc. So it would change opportunities for communities. It would be such a big deal. So no change, however, without federal policy and with well-managed implementation at the regional and the local level. So you can't just do it one way. You've got to sort of do it at the big top, and then you have to go down and make sure it's getting reinforced and reinforced as it goes down to the smaller areas until you're dealing with a local level. First you got to get the policy, and then you got to start pushing the policy down in the smaller areas. So international intervention then, here's an example of how the international world is not aware or not capable of being responsible for the decisions that they make when it comes to women's farming in Africa. So Ghana's first poverty reduction strategy, when they found oil in 2007, and when they found that oil, they decided that they wanted to get up a jump in the category of wealth that's identified by the World Bank for their country. And so what they did was they thought, okay, we're really going to work this out. We're going to start this poverty reduction strategy, and then we're going to be able to do all these kinds of things that are going to help these. They finally had recognized they wanted to do something to help women farmers, and were being active on it. So they went around the whole country talking to women farmers, especially in the north. They got people who were were capable of speaking three. Like they went to places where there was someone who could translate for them to the local language, because the local language women don't, where I work, they don't speak English and they don't speak Twi, the official languages of the country, so they had to have translators. And they went to all these places and got groups of women and talked to them in their language about what it would mean for them to improve their growth of food, and how they could manage that and how they could work it out. They got it all set up. So they were interested in gender equity. So in other words, women have sort of equal rights and access to stuff where they're growing food and making their life reasonable, towards sustainable, equitable growth. That was their vision. We will have gender equity, which will give us sustainable, equitable growth. Accelerated poverty reduction would be another thing that would come out of that, because if they're doing better with their food growth, they might be able to sell some, or they at least won't have to, try and get things that they have to be, that are costs for them, right? And also protection of the vulnerable and the excluded, those who have consistently been blocked out, and those who are vulnerable in terms of money, in terms of how the weather is affecting them, in terms of how their husband responds to them, in terms of so many different ways that they are vulnerable, to give them supports that would help them get through those particular issues. The International Monetary Fund is the one that that they sent the request for the poverty reduction strategy. So the World Bank is like, let's do this stuff, that's great, but you got to pass it through the IMF, and the IMF has to agree on it. And the IMF said, look, we got to focus on market factors. You're not talking about market factors, you're talking about growth factors. We have to return to gender on the education gap. We need to have every country in Africa have 50% boys, 50% girls in K-12 education. And you would think in universities as well. That's what we want to focus on. We don't care about those farmers. We don't care about what they're doing. They will just cost us money. We are not doing this project for you because it's going to cost us money. We are doing this project to open up opportunities for you to increase your wealth. And that's not what you're doing if you're spending a ton of money on a bunch of women we don't even know anything about, who's never been talked about, etc. So the International Monetary Fund completely crushed the Ghanaian plan in their poverty reduction strategy for what they thought would be poverty reduction. Now the girls get to participate in the economy because they have got the education. They've got the education. Ghana was unable to support women farmers then with credit and improved technology service, skills upgrading. None of that was then made available to the women. The results, you have a giant number of educated, unemployed young women who don't want to go to farming now. They want to be in the city where they've had some education. They want to be there and they want to get paid work there. So they don't want to go and farm now. We also have the other problem is no finance being provided now, because finance would have been provided for older women who've been growing for a long time in northern Ghana, right? They lost everything that had been asked for them. No finance, no technology supports for aging women. So you've got women who are growing food who don't have the resources to do it in an appropriate way, who are getting older and older, making it therefore harder and harder and more risky for them. And you have a whole bunch of young women trained in something that they can't get a job in. Thank you, IMF. The IMF, we know you must have taken a whole ton of degrees and been educated in a really big way to make that much of a mess of a country that had figured out what would be best for its peoples. Sorry if I sound angry. This is nothing compared to how angry I am. I'm totally blocking it down because I don't want to scare anyone, even myself. So the timing, when that happened, think about when the timing also was. That was in the time where they were starting to have loss of reliable food production. So not only did the International Monetary Fund get rid of something that would have been helpful, it was something that would be an incredible defense against climate change. They also lost that. So, part two, skipping from that to economics and agriculture, which I'm just calling also money v. capital. And I want to say some things about money and capital in the way that I'm using those words. I think I got it in there somewhere, but I just want to say it now so that it's clear. I'm not saying that money's good and capital's bad. I'm just saying there's two things that I want to talk about, and they're both related to money and finance. So I'm going to call one money, and that's going to be simple, because money is basically, you give me something, I give you money, right? It's that simple. It's a person doing an exchange. You get something for something. And then we have this other thing that I'm calling capital. And capital is not aimed at exchange. It's aimed at profit. And I'm not saying this is always true of capital. I'm just saying I need two words to use to make my argument. So I'm calling the second one capital. And that means the goal is profit, as opposed to the goal is exchange of something needs in return for cash, for money. Now we have credit cards, and I don't even know what they are now, because you just go, ooh, and it goes, and you're like, oh, hey, now I can take a whiskey home. Maybe it's not whiskey, but you know what I mean. Just came up as an example, right? So we're talking about women farmers here. So first I'm going to talk about the invisibility of women, and I've already mentioned it. These women are growing all this food. They're basically feeding countries, right? And they're completely ignored, like they don't even exist at all, right? Why not? Because they're not in the market. They're not in the capital game. They're not even hardly barely in the money game. I mean, I work with women who are living, some of them are living off $1 a year. I couldn't even live off $1 in 5 seconds a day. That's already how expensive it's already been for me, just even thinking about it, right? So, you know, they've got other ways of doing things, like labor exchanges, right? Like you look after my kids tomorrow, and I will look after your kids the next day, and in the meantime, we can both do what it is we need to do on those days, etc. So they have other kind of economies. An economy is actually etymology, you know, if you look at the origin of the word, it actually means, you know, in your house. Right? It means doing stuff in your house. But it's become not doing stuff in your house now. It's been doing stuff in your corporations, which are not houses, right? Very different in their intent, in their atmosphere, in everything, right? So women are not in the market economy, therefore, as Warren pointed in 1988, so we've known for a long time now, that women who don't participate in the economy that's, you know, counted for the state are basically invisible regardless of what they're doing that contributes to actually allows the country to work, which itself is a kind of contribution, even if it's not particularly cash, right? So women's role is widely known but overlooked in policy and in finance. And then climate and poverty coming together means lack of concern for women's subsistence farming. I think that's already been made pretty clear what I'm talking about. So if we talk about money and capital then, by money I mean an exchange system, and capital I mean a profit system. So for example, small business goes bankrupt, capital perspective, that loss is replaced, needs are now met, so it's okay, everything's evened off again. And I had a student say that in a class once that I was teaching. The student said, look, it's okay if a bunch of stuff goes out of business because another company just comes up and takes over, so we're back where we were and everything's fine. And I'm like, not if you're the person who are a mom and pop business. If you're a small business, it's not everything's fine for you now that someone else is doing that what you used to do in that place, right? Because you're destroyed. You've lost everything. And you were saving all that money for your retirement, that's gone now too, right? So we have to understand that everything's not just fine if you're just counting the number of places you could buy and go and buy a Wanka Wanka, right? You want to go buy a Wanka Wanka, the Wanka Wanka company, you know, store is gone. Some of you see what Wanka, know what Wanka means. That's interesting because often Americans don't know that, so don't tell the rest of them, right? So it's catastrophic for people to have something like that happen to them. Catastrophic. You've done that's been your whole adult life, right? And now suddenly it's all lost to you. So we have to remember that. And the difference is understanding what impacts are on people. Not just what the numbers are doing. We live in a world now where it's all about numbers, right? It's even hard to do, you know, qualitative research because nobody takes qualitative research seriously. It's just somebody's opinion. If you want real research, it's got to be quantitative. You got to be able to put it in a map and show how X is bigger than Y. And I'm like, wow, way to go, X. Just leave that for now, right? You understand the distinction there? The distinction being care for a person and what's happening to them, and care to what's available for other people as resources now. Those are two very, very, very different things. But they're actually the same thing, right? Happening in two different ways because it's two different groups of people. So note, focus on Africa again, but globally, women farmers are undervalued and are under-supported. I don't know why I thought I should put that there, but it seemed to be important maybe just to remind us of it again, but also to consider it as a factor that has not yet been lost in this. Economics and agriculture in Africa, following that up. So Ghana's poverty reduction strategy, Ghana money, IMF was one, you know, so Ghana was working on the principle that I have called money, and IMF was working on the principle that I have called capital. So the goals, for Ghana, the goals were support women's farming and work against rural poverty as a development for the country. IMF wanted it to be create wealth, not spend money. And at some level there's a similarity there, right? Because they both wanted to improve Ghana financially, but they were different, incredibly different, because the money was about overcoming poverty, whereas the capital was about gaining wealth. And they're not quite the same way, because when you gain wealth, who's it going to go into? That wealth is coming in big numbers and it's going to the government. And that is not helping you at all. If you're a woman in northern Ghana who only speaks Frafra and who is losing the capacity to grow enough food to feed their children, right? It's not actually getting down to you. If it is, you know, coming down, it's not having any kind of impact. And I can tell you that whenever somebody tells you that the drop down, what is that the phrase, drop down?
Trickle down.
What?
Trickle down.
The trickle down, I can tell you every time. Can I say something bad? Would you be all right if I said it? Okay. Tell me the phrase again.
Trickle down.
If you see trickle down, somebody's getting pissed off. Absolutely true. Crucial distinction. What's the base concern that they had together? What is the crucial distinction here, right, between these two things. Are we helping people to counter poverty or creating wealth to help the country? Benefit of the country is not the same as benefit of the people. So we have to remember that difference. And I think it's important that the difference between counter poverty there is about what I am calling money, and wealth to help the country is what I'm calling capital. But of course the country, I'm talking also about, international corporations, right? So wealth, I don't think that we need that. Well, why does IMF favor education over agriculture? Because they want to develop the economy. Well, it didn't help on that, did it? Because now they're just all unemployed. Why does the Canadian government favor agriculture? To develop the people. It's one thing to develop an economy, which isn't really a real thing, right? It's an idea that you can collect information and data on, but developing the people is actual, a practical, impactful thing that has an impact on people's, women's lives. So just, I think this is like the last. If it's not the last, it's very close. I'm probably over on time.
A little bit of time would be good to save some time for a few
Okay,
questions.
so very little left here. Promise now, development, the promise of development when we go into the global, from the global north, we go into the global south and say we can create active economies, going to get the GNP up, we can reduce poverty, we're going to enable development. The truth is there's no place for women subsistence farmers in that, because they're not even recognized as doing any kind of business or doing anything useful, even though they're making it possible for the people in the country to survive and for the country itself, therefore, to continue to exist as it is. So the reality then in the exploitation of the global south, there's a whole list here, and this is being recorded, or you can send me a message and I'll send you this whole thing and then you'll be able to see that yourself. But that's a really strong list of exploitation of the global south. The only thing I really want to point out of that is we have an understanding that the global north does a lot for the global south. We're constantly sending money to places in the global south. We are constantly supporting them and helping them because they're always having these problems, those poor people. The truth is, it was in the 1980s that it actually became the case that the more resources and more labor was being shifted from the global south to the global north, and has continued since then. So we are not sending things at our sacrifice to support them. We are continuing with systems where the benefits are coming from the south to the north. They're going into Europe, they're going into here, they're going into Canada. The rest of it you can see out of that for yourself. It includes things like defenders, so murder of defenders who protect their land against it being taken over by corporations. You can see how that's a problem. And again, I've written about all those things, so you can ask me about them if you want more of the actual details. So what I'm arguing for, basically, and what I've been arguing for now, is what I'm calling logics of capital and logics of care. Because my principle is that economic systems, the goal is profit, ethics, the goal is, in the world we live in now, in the economic system, the goal is profit, the ethics are utilitarian ethics, patriarchal and the phallic order are running those things. So theoretical framework that we get in this account then, people are lazy and greedy. That's one of the fundamental principles of capital. Purpose of human life and individual accumulation of private wealth are factors there. That human life, that's the purpose of human life. Do you think it's the case that the purpose of human life is the individual accumulation of private wealth? That's sure what we're taught, right? You should be able to buy a new car every 3 years, possibly 2. Maybe you're not going to do that, but you should be able to have enough money to do the things that you want to do. I mean, that's why we do college, right? So we can get a job and be wealthy, etc. We don't want to go through with no education and put our children through no education. We want to put them through, and we want them to be able to accumulate private wealth. And we all show it off in our cars, etc., right? So that's a factor that belongs to capital. And also the idea of power, control, ownership. They are fundamental to what I'm calling capital, rather than what I'm calling money, which is more about whether your neighbors are your friends, whether your child has cancer or not, etc. Things that actually affect human lives. But really, capital is not activity or something, right? It's a logic. It's a way of thinking that structures society and structures human relations. So what if, utilitarianism is also a bit of a problem because it's a calculus. You don't worry about the values. When you're doing your utilitarianism, when you're being a utilitarian, the values have already been decided. you're not negotiating them and deciding what they should mean at that point. It's already been chosen, and now you're just putting the numbers together to see what's the best way your corporation should make its decision before, to make their reckoning. So those are quite different things, because it means that you can make choices without having the ethical requirement to have a discussion about the values that are determining the numbers, and you are making the decisions on the basis of the numbers. So it's not the greatest good that we're talking about here in utilitarianism for the greatest number. Frankly, looking around the world now, what I'm seeing is privilege of the few at the cost of the many. Remember those few men who had more money, if they were put together, than all of the women, the hundreds of millions of women who are in Africa, right? That's a really important distinction. So what do we get out of that then? We can transfer, I'm not saying we have to get rid of capital, because that would be impossible. But what we can do is we could change it from inside. And we can do that with what I would call logics of care. What do I mean by logic of care? I mean a social system that structures communities as interactive dependency. Not as you're rich, you're not. But of communities where people are working together. It's very common now. You get in your car and you back out of the driveway and you wave at your neighbors, but you almost never talk to them, right? What about communities where people can work with each other, and when someone's having a hard time, you can help them out, and when you're having a hard time, they will help you out, right? How can we act as communities? If this is a labor-based idea, care work for family, community, other life, like looking after animals, ecosystem. Caring means aimed not at profit, not at wealth, but at thriving, at the thriving of you, the people that are around you, the animals that are around you, the ecosystem that is around you. And it's a theoretical framework. Do you remember Niwakoni? Do you remember that phrase? It means water is life. We think, why water now? Because water is fundamentally crucial in order for there to be a planet and for it to be what we are. That's absolutely, without that we have nothing. Water is the first place you live, which is in your mother's womb, right? Sustainability, balance, proportion. Those are the things we can look at with logics of care, because we care about the future, we care about what we're doing impacts on all kinds of different things, on other people, on the ecosystems, etc., right? So logics of care are very different, but they're also, care is misunderstood in some ways, because it seems, to say somebody does care is to say that they are, someone who is understood as gender-based response to emotion. In other words, it's connected to women. Women care. We look after babies. And I'm saying, we don't do that because we're just like, oh, I just have this feeling of love, and I just am this thing. I'm not some girly. Do you think I'm a girly? Look at how I talk. Look at what I've said. Look at how I give examples by doing things like that. I swore, right? I'm just going to look after my baby now because I'm like caring. I mean, what woman does that? No woman does that, right? Maybe for about 10 minutes when she's like 22, something like that. Little makeup. I don't know, right? What does it mean to take care? It means that you actually, what's the thing that you said? You said it's many, everything, always at the same time. Did you notice it? You guys all seen that? Oh, y'all gotta watch it. You gotta watch it. But basically, it shows you very clearly about what looks like a weak man is absolutely the wisdom of how to live in a culture that's functional. We don't have, I should be saying we don't have to be macho. You don't have to be at war. You can actually just be thinking about what's going on around you, etc. There's a lot going on in that film, and if you watch it, you'll understand exactly what I was just talking about. But care is not just being nice or just having those kinds of ideas. It's an activity, it's your work, it's what you do. It's based on need, it's based on reason. And so when women have that faculty and that skill, it's not, when they are caring, it's not a response to it's not a feeling they have. It's the work that they do, and the work that you do determines you as you're a woman. And it doesn't matter who you are to do that work too. You can pick up the baby and feed the baby, and yes, you can't breastfeed the baby, but you can feed that baby other things when it gets older. There's all kinds of things that you can do, right? Across gender, there's no real breakdown between what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman and what you can do to do things. It doesn't matter. You can do it. Anyone can do it. And it would be really wise to do so now in response to climate change. Because again, not my future, your future. So if you don't You know, if you're not concerned about climate change already, you definitely should be. But what I really want to say now is we're living in a time of change, of mass extinction. There's a bunch of information here. Let me take you back to these things that happened between August 8th and September 9th. Maui fire, 97 people died. Morocco quake, 2,900 people died. Libya flood, 5,300 people died. Have you ever seen nature slap down on the planet like that? Gee, I wonder if it's what we're doing that's putting all that extra water into the ocean is what's the cause of these things, right? They're all near the coast, and water is impacting their community. What do we have there? We have earth, we have fire, we have water. Those are things that work well for us, and now they're turning on us. And we have to fight to change that by trying to turn back climate change, if it's still possible to do that. What we're actually seeing is an incapacity to respond to climate change, which is why I'm not going back to the UNFCCC. So core issue, corporate reluctance embedded in capital, maximum return on investments, weaning out oil business. We need to get rid of that, exacerbated by government's denial, reluctance in elections. We saw that in the US for a long time, that has almost destroyed the planet's response to climate change. The United States, by getting out of that, has completely taken us backward on dealing that. But if you think about economics in the academy, it's crucial for climate change response, right? Because the thing I'm talking about to address climate change is changing our understanding of cash, of money, of changing our understanding of that, right, in the economics. And youth begin to develop understanding of ethics. I forgot to put the citation here, but research has shown that youth between roughly 18 and 2020, that is the period of life in which human beings develop their capacity to understand ethics. What that tells me is that teaching ethics in economics is hence very, very, very much in undergraduate education, in order for we to have a generation come around now that can actually fight climate change and that understands what the difference is between money and capital. So academic collaboration between economics and philosophy, which I think is something that you're already initiating here perhaps, or considering, this is crucially called for if the next gen students, the students that come after you, are to have a world. And I think it's your responsibility to take it up with your teachers, to think through more deeply and to propose yourselves and suggest working together between ethics in philosophy and what we know in economics and about what it means to learn how to manage money and work with that. And sorry it took so long. That's why it took so long. And there's the end, and there's if you want to send me an email and ask me a question or tell me you're wrong about it, whatever. I love to argue. If we never argued, philosophy wouldn't exist, so please argue as much as you want. And thank you so much for just being patient and listening for all that time. Am I okay? Oh yeah, questions.
Yeah, so we're officially sort of at time, but if anyone has a couple questions, we're just going to take them. You need to get going or you understand. Any questions?
So if we included in GDP subsistence agriculture and care work, do you think the IMF would have made a different decision?
No.
You're
No. Well, I think it takes a bunch of time, right? But I think that it would change the IMF, and that would be what would make the difference. I mean, people don't look at things and then it changes them, but they will eventually be changed by things, and that's when it makes a difference, right? And so I think that could happen. But the IMF, I mean, they don't really care. Like the World Bank is about making countries be able to survive, like helping. But the IMF is about once you're there, like they don't care anything about that. And if you ask them, I have actually asked the guy who runs that place, who runs the IMF, and he's like, we just don't care about that. We care about if you're a country that's running well, we're going to help you get to be better, right? So they're two very different things. But nobody should be ignoring that basic thing, right? Anything else? Yes?
It's part of the reason of growing wealth, that in a sense you're in debt now with us, and we can sort of, I'm thinking about the case of Latin America and how
Oh,
being
yeah.
in debt with the IMF meant restructuring social programs, restructuring social spending. So then now it's the IMF in control in a sense. How you're spending money in your country.
It is a big problem, yeah, because in the end, I mean, it's like anything. If you really want to help someone or something, you have to ask them to describe it to you. You can't just say, well, we actually know what's going on and what you're doing. You know, you can't just sort of plan it for them. And that's kind of what the, IMF and these kind of organizations do, right? They actually work out what they think is best for everyone, and then they have you do it, and they don't really know what you're asking for. So that's a giant problem in the global south. And also there's the other problem of, for example, I forget which island it was in Central America, I should know, because it's the one where everybody smokes a lot of pot. Which, what? Jamaica. And so, an organization brought in a whole bunch of, milk stuff. They were making milk now. They were putting milk together, and they took it in there, and they charged almost. This was when they were pushed into having to go into the global. Their money was then able to be traded in global context, right? And so they went in there, and you could buy this milk, and it was like, oh, cool, fancy, new and all, so that's cool. And also it was very cheap. And so all the people who had the cows and who were doing the milk all that time went bankrupt. And when they were bankrupt, suddenly the price of the fabricated baby food went up. And nobody had any choice now. So first off, it's not got as nutritional value as it does from taking it from the mother, because nature knows it's been doing it for ever and ever, right? As compared to the corporation that was doing it for the last 6 years or so or whatever, right? So that's a big significant too, right? To come in and destroy an economic system by cheating, by giving a favor that turned into terrible for the people who were living there. That's a really good question. And I don't know how it's going to get to solve. I was at a meeting in Africa. There were only like 10 of us were invited, and then there was a greater crowd that they had put around, so that was kind of creepy. But they, a guy who was from the World Bank gave a film, and he was talking about how they had just brought all of this great stuff into that country, and they'd sorted all that stuff out, and everything was fine, and all the women were standing outside their house all smiling, showing the things that they had grown and everything. And then the next picture was all these giant things going through giant, food areas that had grown, and they were cutting it down, right? They were harvesting it. And so in the question period, I said, I think kind of what you're saying is in contradiction, because you're saying that women's agriculture is this thing now that you're totally supporting, but then you're supporting this other thing. It's nothing about women's agriculture. It's about corporate agriculture that doesn't help them at all, because they become, again, the invisible women who just disappear and have no role now and no access. So basically they just get to starve or die poor or whatever it is you're expecting. And he didn't really, he sort of said something, and I was like, that wasn't much of an answer. And then later when we were having dinner, he came over and he said, sit over here. And I sat down and he said, this is the problem and this is what we have to do. And you can never quote this and tell anyone my name. And he had this whole process that he wanted to put into. And I don't think that he was able to do it, but it was just very good to see that he understood the problem that I had identified. And he's really irritated that it had been identified, but he also was very helpful in talking. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. So I am, I guess, a little concerned about how this talk participates in a kind of victim discourse of the poor black or brown woman that kind of leads into a sort of Western savior mindset, right? It's the kind of, you're right? The women of Africa are global victims of climate change, right? But, I mean, certainly they're also agents in their world. And so what are they doing to resist? And I ask this question because the sort of discourse of the poor brown woman of the globe that needs to be saved is the precise sort of justification that George Bush used to invade Afghanistan, that's regularly used for these various Western kind of interventions that, like you were showing with the IMF, just end up fucking things up.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like, what are women doing to resist? Because I'm also, like, a little worried about the way that maybe some of this talk is also just reinscribing gender roles in terms of, I know you're trying to get away from it with care, but there's a whole, you know, feminist discourse about care and how to think about care in a way that's not reinscribing. But then also, you know, the sort of comment that you made about the IMF fucking it up, because now women are trying to get educated because they want something more than just providing their survival, you know, like, which is a very human thing. And it's something that women have so long been denied the ability to do, right?
Sure.
Certainly within the Western world. And so I guess, like, the question that I have is what are women doing as agents in Ghana to resist?
Well, all over the world, they're doing all kinds of things, all over the global south. I can only do so much, and I even did too much for what I did. I never once said that women are victims. I said that they lose what they have, that they don't get what they need, but I didn't say that they were victims. And I do not think that they're victims. I think they're some of the strongest people I know on the planet. I couldn't live for a month in where they live and the things that they do. And I have tons and tons to say about that, and I've written a whole bunch about that and done it regularly, and constantly made a point of saying this is not about that they are the victim. It's about the point that they are strong enough to come out with things. And I have all kinds of examples of that, and I'll be happy to share some of that research, you know, for you. But I really wanted to make some really strong points about things being taken away from women. And I think I did it in a way that was probably very insulting for many of the men in the room, because I was basically saying that women are getting, to use your expression, if that's okay, fucked by gender. By who's doing that for them? It's primarily coming from male voices, from male practices, historical male beliefs about how women should behave, what they should do, etc., right? So, sorry if I upset you. I'm happy if I upset you, because at some point you gotta open your eyes to what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman and what the differences are for. When I do interviews with trans men, every single one of them says to me, you have no idea how much better my life is now. And when I interview trans women, especially the ones who don't take the pills and therefore, you know, grow, regularly getting beat up in bars, right? Think about that difference. Think about what it means to be a woman in a bar not acting like she's supposed to because she's growing a beard. What do? Right? At the same time, she becomes a man. The man now walks into a store, that's not a joke, beginning, gets attention pretty much immediately. I can stand there for 5 minutes. No one comes. The guy walks in, they usually come over, can I help you, sir? And I'm like, yeah, you can. And I bust right in. They're like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean you. And I said, sir. And I'm like, well, I didn't mean bitch, but here we are. And then I say what I want. Right? So, you know, there's so much gender bias going on. It's really hard to recognize. I mean, one of the things about beautiful about the LGBTQ community is you actually get to learn what the difference is between a man and being a man and being a woman in a cultural context, right? And that's a really important thing for all of us to be able to understand. I mean, that's a really good question, and I'm, you know, shamed for not making it more clearly of a point, but you know, you're right, and I'm totally with you, and it's just good to know that we're thinking the same thing, and if I'm revising this, I'm going to get a couple of things in there that make that clear. You know, thanks. You don't have to stay if you don't have questions and you don't want to stay. It's just I'm like, wow, you guys are like staying. That's super cool. Thank you so much.